there is a moment that arrives without warning. You are sitting across from someone who has never struggled for what you are still reaching for. The conversation is light. They mention a trip, a purchase, a decision they made without thinking, and you feel something tighten behind your ribs. Not jealousy, something older, something that recognizes a language you were never taught to speak. You smile. You respond. But some part of you has already left the room, calculating how many hours you would need to work, how many months you would need to save, to make that same casual choice. And in that calculation, something quietly breaks. Not your bank account, your sense of who you are in relation to the world. You have been told that effort is noble, that struggle builds character, that the person who works harder deserves more. But no one warned you about the hidden contract you signed, the one where your effort became proof that you are not where they are, proof that you still need to try, proof that the world they move through effortlessly is a world you must earn entry into, again and again, with no guarantee of acceptance. Consider the last time you explained your schedule to someone, how you filled the silence with details about your workload, your side projects, your plans. You were not sharing, you were testifying. You were building a case for your own worth in real time, hoping the jury would recognize your effort as evidence of future arrival. But here is what you missed. While you were constructing your argument, they were already home. They were never on trial. They never needed to prove anything. And the more passionately you presented your case, the more you revealed the distance between where you stand and where they began. This is not about money. Not really. It is about the psychological architecture that forms around scarcity. The way your mind begins to organize itself around the belief that value must be demonstrated, not assumed. You do not simply work, you perform work. You stage it. You leave evidence of it in conversations, in social media posts, in the exhaustion you carry like a credential. You have learned to turn struggle into a currency, hoping someone will finally cash it in and validate your position. But the economy you are operating in does not trade in effort. It trades in belonging. And belonging for them was never earned. It was inherited, not just financially. Psychologically, they grew up knowing that the world would make space for them. You grew up knowing you would need to shrink to fit into whatever space remained. This is not a metaphor, it is a nervous system pattern. Watch yourself in a room where you are the least established person present. Notice how your body organizes itself. Shoulders forward, slightly, speech accelerating, a need to fill silence before it exposes you. You are not simply uncomfortable. You are performing survival in a social environment your body reads as threat. And the threat is not them. The threat is the possibility that you will be seen as someone who does not belong, someone who is still trying. The irony is almost unbearable. Your effort, which you have been taught to celebrate, becomes the very signal that betrays you. The harder you work to close the gap, the wider the gap appears. Because effort is visible. It leaves traces. It shows up in your calendar, in your stress, in the way you cannot make a decision without calculating cost. Their ease is invisible. It requires no explanation. It generates no friction. And in the space between your visible struggle and their invisible comfort, a story forms. The story that you are still becoming, that they have already arrived, that your path is longer because you are lesser. This story is not true, but it is functional. It keeps you moving. It keeps you producing. It keeps you hoping that one day the effort will finally balance the scales and you will be granted the same casual relationship with possibility that they have always known. But the scales do not balance this way, because the psychological weight you are carrying is not measured in dollars. It is measured in the constant, low-grade hum of needing to justify your existence in spaces where others simply occupy. Think about the last invitation you received that you could not afford, not the money, the psychology of it. The way you had to construct an excuse that sounded like a choice rather than a limitation. The way you rehearsed it so it would not sound like lack. The way you watched them accept it without question, because for them, the idea that someone might not be able to participate is not a reality they have had to internalize. Their acceptance of your excuse was not unkind. It was simply unburdened by the recognition of what that excuse cost you to create. And in that moment, you were not just absent from the event. You were absent from the shared reality they were inhabiting. This absence accumulates. It becomes a pattern. You begin to recognize that there are rooms you will never enter without first passing through a gauntlet of internal preparation. Rooms where your clothing will be read before your words, where your hesitation will be noticed before your intelligence, where the pause before you speak will be interpreted as uncertainty rather than the careful navigation of a minefield you did not place but must still cross. You learn to move faster, speak louder, prepare more thoroughly. You learn to compensate, but compensation is always visible. It is always effort, and effort in these spaces is always read as apology. You have developed a skill you never asked for, the ability to detect in microseconds whether you are in a room where your presence requires explanation. This is not paranoia. This is pattern recognition built on years of evidence. The slight shift in posture when you mention where you live. The micro-pause when you describe what you do. The way conversations about money or travel or education suddenly require you to either perform understanding you do not have or reveal the gap you have been trying to hide. You have become an expert in reading rooms because your safety in them has always been conditional. And conditional safety teaches you to scan for threat before you scan for connection. But here is the deeper mechanism, the one operating beneath your awareness. You have begun to need the gap. Not consciously, not deliberately, but your identity has organized itself around the narrative of overcoming. You are the one who tries harder, who works longer, who sacrifices more. This identity gives you structure, it gives you meaning, it gives you a way to understand your suffering that does not require you to confront the possibility that the game was rigged before you started playing. If the gap is your fault, then your effort matters. If the gap is systemic, then your effort is a performance in a theater where the audience has already left. This is the contradiction that lives in your chest. You need to believe that your struggle is noble, because the alternative is unbearable. The alternative is that you have been running a race where the finish line moves every time you approach it, that your effort is not building toward arrival, but is instead the very thing that marks you as someone who has not arrived. And if that is true, then what have you been doing? What have you been sacrificing? What version of yourself have you been slowly erasing in the name of a destination that may not exist? You remember the first time you realized that someone else's casual decision required your strategic planning. Maybe it was a dinner, a trip, a gift, something they chose in a moment that you would need to budget for weeks. And in that realization, something shifted, not just financially, psychologically. You began to understand that there were two operating systems running simultaneously. Theirs, which processed possibility as default. Yours, which processed possibility as exception. And you have been trying to install their operating system on your hardware, not understanding that the incompatibility is not a bug to be fixed, but a design feature of a structure you did not build. The harder you try to run their software, the more your system overheats. You work longer to afford what they do not think about. You stress more to achieve what they assume. You apologize for what you cannot provide while they never consider that provision is required. And in this asymmetry, your effort becomes a spotlight. It illuminates the gap. It makes the distance visible not just to you, but to everyone watching. You think you are demonstrating determination, You are actually demonstrating difference. And in the social mathematics of these spaces, difference is read as deficit. This is why your confidence fractures in rooms where it should hold. Not because you are incapable, because you are calculating. You are running a background process that they do not have to run. You are monitoring your words, your appearance, your references, your comfort level, while they are simply present. And the cognitive load of that monitoring is exhausting. It leaves less bandwidth for the actual interaction, less space for the actual you. You become a performance of competence rather than an expression of it, and the performance, however skilled, is always slightly late, always slightly forced, always slightly desperate in its precision. You have learned to translate, to convert your experiences into their language, to frame your struggles as narratives they can recognize, to smooth the edges of your reality so it does not snag on the fabric of theirs. This translation is labor, invisible labor, the kind that does not appear on your resume or your tax return but appears everywhere in your psychology. It appears in the hesitation before you speak, in the edit after you speak, in the review of conversations that they have already forgotten. You are working overtime in every social exchange, and the overtime is never compensated. It is only expected, and the expectation, internalized, becomes a voice that tells you this is simply how it is, this is simply what is required, this is simply the price of entry. But entry into what? Into a room where your presence is still being evaluated, into a conversation where your value is still being tested, into a life where your choices are still being measured against a standard you did not set and cannot fully meet. The harder you try to earn your place in these rooms, the more you confirm that your place is not assumed. The more you demonstrate your right to be there, the more you reveal that the right was never granted. You are not proving your belonging. You are proving your need to belong. And need in these dynamics is the opposite of power. This is the loop that holds you, the one where your effort to escape the pattern reinforces the pattern, where your struggle to be seen as equal marks you as someone for whom equality is still a goal rather than a baseline. You are not climbing out of the gap, you are engraving it, deepening it with every demonstration of how hard you are working to cross it. And the engraving is not just visible to others, it is visible to you. It becomes part of your self-image. The person who tries, the person who struggles, the person who has not yet arrived but is working toward it. This person is noble. This person is admirable. This person is also trapped. Because what happens when you arrive, if you arrive? Who are you then? If your identity is built on the architecture of effort, what is the architecture of rest? If your value is tied to your struggle, what is your value in ease? You have not practiced being the person who does not need to try. You have not rehearsed the psychology of arrival. And so arrival itself becomes threatening. It asks you to become someone you do not know how to be, someone whose presence does not require justification, someone whose choices do not require explanation, someone who moves through the world with the casual confidence of belonging. And that someone is not you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because the you that you have built is a you that tries. And trying, once it becomes identity, does not simply stop when circumstances change. It finds new gaps, new struggles, new proofs of effort required. This is the pattern that operates beneath your ambition, the pattern that turns every achievement into a new baseline rather than a destination. You reach a level you once dreamed of, and instead of inhabiting it, you immediately begin scanning for the next gap, the next room where you do not quite fit, the next standard you have not quite met, the next them who is still ahead. And in this perpetual forward motion, you never actually arrive anywhere. You are always in transit, always in effort, always in the process of becoming rather than the state of being. The psychological cost of this pattern is measured in presence. You are rarely fully where you are. Some part of you is always calculating the next move, the next requirement, the next gap to close. You are in a conversation, but also in a performance review. You are at an event, but also in a strategy session. You are celebrating a win, but already preparing the defense for the next challenge. Your mind is a split screen, and the split is exhausting. It prevents the depth of experience that makes life feel lived rather than managed. And the management, however skilled, is always a substitute for the thing you actually want, which is not arrival, it is rest. It is the freedom to be where you are without needing to be somewhere else. It is the psychological equivalent of their casual trip, their casual purchase, their casual decision. The freedom from the background hum of needing to earn your existence. You think you are working toward financial security, but look closer. What you are actually working toward is psychological security. The belief that you are safe, that you are enough, that you do not need to try so hard to be valid. And because this security is internal, no amount of external achievement can fully provide it. You could cross the financial gap tomorrow and still wake up running the same background processes, still scanning for threat, still translating your experience, still preparing your case. The habits of scarcity do not dissolve when scarcity ends. They become the ghost in your machine, the automatic response that fires before you have a chance to choose. This is why the gap persists even when the numbers change, because the gap was never just economic, it was epistemic, a difference in how you know the world. They know the world as a place that accommodates them. You know the world as a place that must be negotiated with. These are not beliefs you chose. They are knowings built on decades of evidence. An evidence-based knowing does not shift with a single counterexample. It shifts slowly, through repeated experience of a different reality, through the gradual building of new evidence that contradicts the old. But if you are still running the old software, you will filter the new evidence through the old framework. You will find ways to interpret your success as still not enough, your arrival as still provisional, your belonging as still conditional. The conversation you need to have is not with them. It is with the part of you that learned to need the gap, the part that organized itself around struggle, because struggle was familiar, because struggle gave you a role, because struggle was the only relationship with the world that felt real. This part is not wrong. It protected you. It drove you. It built the you that survived. But it is not the part that can inhabit the life you are trying to build. It is the part that will keep building, keep striving, keep proving, because that is what it knows how to do. And if you do not recognize this part, if you do not see its operation in your daily choices, you will continue to be driven by a force that does not want what you want, a force that wants the struggle because the struggle is its home. This recognition is uncomfortable. It asks you to look at the possibility that your effort is not entirely noble, that some percentage of it is habit, some percentage is identity maintenance, some percentage is the avoidance of a quieter, more vulnerable question. Who are you when you are not trying? What is your value when you are not producing? What is your relationship with yourself when the external scoreboard is turned off? These questions do not have easy answers. They are not meant to be answered quickly. They are meant to be lived with, to be turned over slowly in the quiet moments when the background hum becomes audible and you realize it has been playing so long you stopped hearing it. The path forward is not to stop trying. That would be another form of reaction, another swing of the pendulum. The path forward is to become aware of the trying, to notice when your effort is in service of your actual desire and when it is in service of the old pattern, to feel the difference in your body between motivated action and compulsive action, to recognize the voice that says you must, that you should, that you have to, and to ask whether that voice is speaking from wisdom or from wound. This inquiry is slow. It is not dramatic. It does not make for a compelling highlight reel. But it is the only work that actually changes the operating system rather than just running new programs on the old one. You will not close the gap by working harder. You will close it by changing your relationship with the gap, by understanding that the distance between you and them is not just measured in resources, but in the unearned psychological freedom that resources provide, by recognizing that your effort, however genuine, is being filtered through a structure that reads it as proof of your position rather than proof of your potential, and by beginning, gradually, to build a new internal reference point, one that is not dependent on their casual ease, one that does not require their validation, one that can hold your effort as valuable without needing it to be visible, without needing it to be witnessed, without needing it to be converted into belonging. This new reference point is not built in a day. It is built in the small choices where you notice the old pattern firing and you choose differently, where you feel the urge to explain, to justify, to prove, and you pause, where you feel the need to fill the silence with evidence of your work and you let the silence hold, where you recognize that your value is not on trial and you stop building the case. These moments are quiet. They are not revolutionary. But they are the places where the architecture shifts, where the ghost in your machine begins to lose its grip, where you start to become someone who does not need the gap to know who they are. The harder you try to prove them wrong, the more you prove them right. Not because they are right, but because your trying is still organized around their standard. Your effort is still a response to their position. Your struggle is still a dialogue with their ease. And as long as the dialogue continues, you are still in the room they built, still playing the game they designed, still measuring yourself on a scale that was never meant to include you as you are. The exit is not a destination, it is a direction, a gradual turning away from the old conversation and toward a new one. A conversation where your effort is yours, your value is yours, your presence is yours, and the gap, finally, is just space. Not deficiency, not distance, just the room you need to become who you are, without apology, without performance, and without the endless, exhausting need to try. You receive a message. It is from someone you have not spoken to in years. They are doing well. They mention a project, a move, a life that seems to have unfolded without the friction you have come to expect as normal. You type a response, you delete it, you type again. You add an exclamation mark where a period belongs. You soften a statement that did not need softening. You read it back and hear a voice that is not quite yours. It is the voice of someone who is still negotiating, still adjusting, still making sure the tone does not reveal the distance between where they are and where you are. You send it. They reply with something brief, something casual, something that took them no time at all. And you realize, in the space between their message and your next breath, that you are still running the old program, still translating, still trying to be legible to a world that never learned to read you. This is the delayed realization that arrives too late to change the moment, but just in time to change the pattern. You do not see it when it is happening, you see it in the aftermath, in the review, in the quiet hour when you replay the exchange and notice the effort that was invisible to them but glaring to you. The effort to sound effortless, the work to appear unworried, the labor of making your life look like a choice rather than a construction. And in that recognition, something shifts, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of a door closing that you did not know was open. You have been operating under a belief that you did not choose. The belief that control lies in effort. That if you work hard enough, prepare thoroughly enough, monitor carefully enough, you can manage the impression you make. You can control the narrative. You can ensure that the gap does not show. But control in this framework is an illusion maintained by exhaustion. It is not power, it is the performance of power. And the performance requires an audience that believes in it, an audience that does not see the strings. But you are not the audience, you are the puppet. And the strings are your own hands, pulling in directions you learned long before you understood what you were building. The real power does not live where you think it lives. It is not in the hours you work. It is not in the sacrifices you make. It is not in the careful construction of your image. The real power lives in the absence of all of that, in the person who does not need to calculate because the calculation has already been done for them, in the person who does not need to translate because the language is already theirs, in the person who does not need to prove because the proof was never required. This is not a power you can earn by working harder. It is a power you can only recognize by stopping long enough to see the structure that distributes it. And the structure is not visible until you step outside of it, until you catch yourself in the act of performing and ask quietly, who is watching? Until you notice that the effort you are making is not in service of your goal, but in service of an old belief about what your goal requires you to be. This noticing is the beginning of something. Not a solution, not a transformation, but a crack in the pattern. A place where light enters and shows you the room you have been living in. The room where every wall is a mirror reflecting your effort back at you, convincing you that the reflection is the reality. You keep doing something without realizing it. You keep measuring your life against a standard that was never explained to you but that you absorbed completely. The standard of ease, the standard of casualness, the standard of not needing to try. You see it in the people who move through spaces as if they were built for them, who make decisions as if consequences were suggestions, who speak as if their words were already validated before they left their mouths. And you internalize this as the goal, the destination, the version of yourself you are working toward. But you do not notice that the goal itself is a trap, that the person who does not need to try is not a person who has arrived. They are a person who never left, who never had to, who was always already there. You cannot become someone who never had to struggle by struggling more. This is the arithmetic that does not add up, the equation that keeps you solving for a variable that does not exist. You keep doing the math, checking your work, arriving at the same impossible answer, and assuming the error is in your calculation rather than in the problem itself. But the problem was written by a hand that did not include you in its solution set. And your persistence in solving it is not diligence. It is the pattern of trying to earn a place in a theorem that was never meant to prove you. What you keep doing without realizing it is this. You keep converting your experience into evidence, evidence of effort, evidence of growth, evidence of the distance you have traveled. But evidence requires a court, a judge, a verdict, and the court you are standing in is empty. The judge is you, wearing a robe you did not choose. The verdict is always the same. Not enough. Not yet. Keep trying. And the sentence is life. A life spent presenting evidence to a system that does not recognize your jurisdiction. You need to see this, not as an idea, as a pattern, as something that happens in the small hours of the morning when you are planning your next move, as something that happens in the pause before you speak at a meeting, calculating whether your contribution will be read as valuable or as overcompensation, as something that happens in the way you describe your weekend, editing out the parts that do not sound productive enough, interesting enough. These are not isolated moments. They are the behavioral signature of a person who has learned to live as evidence rather than as existence. And the shift, when it comes, does not come as a decision. It comes as a perception, a slow turning of the head until you see the room from a different angle. You see that the gap you have been trying to close is not between you and them. It is between you and yourself, between the part of you that is still trying to earn the right to be here and the part of you that already is. Between the performance of worth and the quiet fact of it. Between the effort that screams and the presence that does not need to announce itself. This perception shift is not comfortable. It asks you to let go of the identity that has carried you, the identity of the striver, the overcomer, the one who works harder than everyone else. This identity has given you structure in a world that felt unstable. It has given you meaning in moments that felt meaningless. It has given you a way to understand your pain that does not require you to feel it fully. Letting go of it is not an upgrade. It is a loss, a necessary loss. Like leaving a home that was too small but that you knew every corner of. The new home is larger, but it is empty, and the emptiness is where you begin. You begin by noticing, by catching the old pattern in the moment before it completes its circuit, by feeling the urge to explain, to justify, to prove, and pausing long enough to ask what would happen if you did not. By sitting in the silence that follows your unedited presence and discovering that it does not collapse, that the room does not project you, that the conversation does not end, that you are still there, still valid, still enough without the effort, without the translation, without the performance. This is the silent psychological truth that lives beneath all the others. The truth that you do not need to try so hard to be real, that your presence, unadorned, uncalculated, unproven, is already a complete sentence, that the gap is not a measure of your distance from them, but a measure of your distance from yourself, and that the closing of the gap does not happen through effort, but through the gradual, uncomfortable, necessary recognition that the effort was never the point. The point was always the being, the quiet, unremarkable, sufficient fact of your existence in a world that never asked you to earn it. A world that simply gave it, and that your task, if there is one, is not to justify the gift, but to finally, fully, without apology, receive it.